Let's take an example of Arjuna. If we want to understand this, we'll go back to the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is complaining to Krishna that he doesn't want to fight the battle. And he gives so many good arguments why not to fight the battle. He says, if we kill these men, the ladies will be unprotected. When women are unprotected, they'll be taken advantage of. Unwanted population will come. The result of that is the family traditions will be lost. And those who destroy the family traditions, they dwell in hell. So these are good arguments, right? Where are those arguments from? What's the basis for the argument that Arjuna is making? Yeah, okay, it's from Vedic culture. Okay, you can say that. It's from Vedic culture, but nonetheless, Krishna says, no, still you have to engage in this battle. Why? Because of the higher principle Krishna wants him to. This is one dharma that he was telling Arjuna to give up. All these things that you think you're supposed to do according to what? Your culture. Okay? Arjuna is arguing from his culture, and Krishna says, leave it out. That also applies to us. What is there in what's the dharma in our culture that we need to give up in order to follow Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita? These things, again, are very subtle. It's difficult for us to understand or appreciate that. Let's take another kind of dharma that maybe we're going to give up. Okay? Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. This was the process of, basically, let's say, the process of religion that was followed in previous times. Dharma, do your dharma according to Vedic culture. From that, you can you do your artha, you do your economic development according to dharma. From that, you'll be able to enjoy, and then at the end of life, after you've had a wonderful life of enjoying, now you go for renunciation and give that up. Is that the process that Prabhupada is instructing us in? Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha? No. I suggest that no, this is one of the dharmas that Krishna is telling us, parityaga, to give it up. Instead, we have a different way of dharma that we are to follow, the dharma that Krishna is giving us in Bhagavad Gita. This is called, Gurukula Maharaj calls this the slow process of self-realization. Many, many lifetimes, coming back to become a perfect Shudra, then you can be born as a Vaishya, then many lifetimes to become a perfect Vaishya, then when you're perfect Vaishya, you can be born as a Kshatriya, again to a Brahmana, and then after becoming a Brahmana, then moksha, liberation. This is the slow process. But that's now been replaced by the fast process. As Prabhupada, what's it called? Called like the elevator. Immediately you come to the topmost platform of Krishna consciousness. So we have a much more powerful process of self-realization now. So this kind of dharma, parityaga, we can give that up. Now, let's think about another kind of dharma that we have to give up. What's Krishna's first instruction? We talked about the last instruction in Bhagavad Gita. What's Krishna's first instruction in Bhagavad Gita? Manmana bhava. No. Dehinos minita dehe. Yeah. You're not the body. Actually, natvevaham chatunasam. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of this cease to be. So the first instruction is you're not the body. And the second instruction is that's the same thing as saying we're not the body.
Perform your duties.
Huh?
Your duty.
No. False ego runs on two tracks. I and mine. So Krishna's first two instructions deal with I and mind. Okay? In the first chapter, after speaking that we're not the body and explaining that the nature of the soul for about 20 verses, and Krishna changes the subject and he begins to speak about how we are not those things that we own, mine. And this is in text 247. Kamanya varikaraste ma paleshu kadachana ma karma palahitu abur mate sangosava karmani. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you're not entitled to the fruits of action. Never be attached to not doing your duty. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. No, I'm sorry. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you're not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities. Never be attached to not doing your duty. So, Krishna says, you have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but the results, they're not for you. Now, does anybody here have a job? Okay. Why do you go to work? To earn money. Otherwise called the fruits of action. So Krishna is telling us, Sarvadharma Parityaga, give this up. This is one of the dharmas he's telling us to give up. Because Mamekam Sarvam Braja, do what I say. And here in 247 he's telling us you're not entitled to the results of that activity. So, but this is the way the modern world works. The modern world works in such a way that everybody's forced to go to work, to get a job, to get money so that they can maintain themselves. Which creates a problem for us in our efforts in self-realization. So, we're not entitled to the fruits of our activity. What else? Let's see. Where is that devotee? Somebody had a camera here not too long ago. Where is he? Oh, no, not him. Somebody else had a camera. Is that you? Can I see the camera? This is a very nice modern camera. I don't know what it cost. A couple of years ago in Mayapur, 2005, I had my first digital camera, and it was stolen. And I felt very aggrieved because somebody had stolen my camera. This is your camera. How did you get this camera?
Nice TV.
How did you get it? You paid for it in the store. You went to a store and you gave them money. Now it's your camera. Right? And I like this camera. Would you be willing to take $5,000 for it? Maybe that's a bit too much. $2,000? Is that okay? This is how we normally do things in our modern culture, right? We exchange. I have this, and you have money. Or I have money, you have a camera. And we're going to exchange. Or I have money, and somebody else has food, somebody else has a house, like that. And so we exchange what I have for what somebody else has. And we think nothing of this, even amongst our devotees. This is simply the way we live, right? But is this what Krishna tells us in Bhagavad Gita? Several times over the last several days, we've heard this, that Krishna is the owner of what? Everything. So where does this concept of my camera, my house, my bicycle, my car, where does that come from? It comes from the dominant culture. This is another one of the dharmas that Krishna says, parityaga, give it up. It's not in keeping with our philosophy. In fact, it undermines our philosophy. We can't actually get the result of our philosophy if we don't follow it. Right? Is it possible? Prabhupada speaks about those people. He called them armchair speculators. Right? They sit around in armchairs like this, and they pontificate. Pontificate? Is that the word? Oh, it's like this, it's like that. Huh? And then they go and they do something entirely different. This is what we do. We come, we hear Bhagavatam every morning, Bhagavad Gita every evening, and then what do? As soon as we leave this property, or maybe even on this property, we go and we do something entirely different, according to the dominant culture in which we're raised. So there's a disconnect going on here. We don't connect the way we're living with the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. So these elements I'm speaking about, ownership, proprietorship, exchange, these are very fundamental principles of economics, and they greatly impact our ability to realize the fruit or the result of Krishna consciousness, Krishna prema, because we keep ourselves unconsciously stuck at a particular level of thinking in terms of I and mine. So we want to be very careful not to mix these two cultures up. And this, in my humble opinion, is why many of our farm projects have failed. Particularly in America, the ones I'm more familiar with, because we don't have a clear understanding of what the Krishna culture is versus the dominant culture, and the need for separating them and realizing the benefit of the Krishna culture. We're trying to realize the benefit of both cultures. Right? We want to have sense gratification and Krishna consciousness both. But Prabhupada says it's not possible. It's impossible. We can't get rati or prema and have sense gratification at the same time. They're mutually incompatible. So, we have a problem then. How are we going to be able to maintain the body and at the same time follow Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita? This is the reason that we compromise, because we have to eat, to have a place to live, we have to get money, and therefore we go and we have a job outside. But even though this is contradictory to our philosophy, still we have to do it. Why? Because we have not established the alternative according to Krishna's instructions. Krishna has given us a way to live in this world. It's already established. We call it it's simple aphorism, simple living, and high thinking. That way is given to us by Krishna. If we follow that, we'll be able to realize all the benefit of the Krishna culture, which means ultimately love of God. But if we don't follow it, we're going to be what we call hamstrung, right? Like you tie your foot like this and you try to go into a race. Not a question. Oh, okay. So, it's very important to separate these two concepts, and that's my speaking about spiritual economics. I'm going to try to do that, and especially tomorrow when I speak about economics in relationship to Varnashram Dharma, is to give the model by which we have an alternative economic system which allows us to live the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So, how many times does the word economics show up in Bhagavad Gita? No. It doesn't exist there. So where is this idea of economics based on Bhagavad Gita? Krishna doesn't use a word that Prabhupada translates as economics, but he speaks about other things. He speaks about work. He speaks about action. He speaks about proprietorship. He speaks about the fruits of work. These things are different labels for other economic terms. And so if we look at those words, wherever they show up in Bhagavad Gita with this understanding, we'll see that actually Bhagavad Gita says a very great deal about economics. So, let me give you some examples. When do we stop?
You've got another around about 30 minutes.
30 minutes for speaking and then 20 minutes for questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'm going to read some slokas from second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And what I want you to pay attention to is wherever Krishna says about work, duty, activity, fruits of action, and so on like that. Okay? Let's see how many times this comes up. This is beginning with 247. You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, and never be attached to not doing your duty. Be steadfast in yoga, O Arjuna. Perform your duty and abandon all attachment to success or failure. Such evenness of mind is called yoga. Dhananjaya, rid yourself of all fruitive activities by devotional service and surrender fully to that consciousness. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. A man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad actions, even in this life. Therefore, strive for yoga, O Arjuna, which is the art of all work. The wise engaged in devotional service take refuge in the Lord and free themselves from the cycle of birth and death by renouncing the fruits of action in the material world. In this way, they attain the state beyond all miseries. So, how many times did Krishna speak about economics in these 4 verses? Quite a few, huh? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times in 5 verses. In the 3rd chapter, he continues. Now, I'm not going to read you all the verses in Bhagavad Gita that relate to economics. There's maybe 15% of the book, at least, is one can understand in this way. In the 3rd chapter, verses 8 and 9, Krishna says, perform your prescribed duty, for action is better than inaction. A man cannot even maintain his physical body without work. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work binds one to this material world. Therefore, son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain unattached and free from bondage. So again, Krishna's, in just 2 verses here, the word work, duty, comes up 4 or 5 times. Again, in the 4th chapter, one is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every act is devoid of desire for sense gratification. Sense gratification also is another word that I think we can relate to economics, because that's the whole point of the modern economy, right? Sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker whose fruit of action is burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. Such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he is not affected by sinful reactions. And then I'm going to read 2 more slokas from the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. This is 5:12. The steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the results of all activities to me. Whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, becomes entangled. In 5:25, one who is beyond duality and doubt, whose mind is engaged within, who is always busy working for the welfare of all sentient beings, and who is freed from all sins, achieves liberation in the Supreme. So these verses here, and I could add to them many, many more, but these verses alone, they explain an entire economic system. Or let's put it this way, if we want to follow Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita, let's take those instructions and look at them and see what kind of activities do they describe? What do we have to do in order to follow these instructions? Okay? So the first point is, everyone must be engaged in some kind of activity. Okay? Krishna says, never be attached to not doing your duty, which is another way of saying it. You must do your duty. In 3.8, he says, perform your prescribed duty. And then in 5.25, he says, always be busy working for the welfare of all sentient beings. So, these doing your duty means this is instructions for what economically might be called production. Right? In modern economic terms, we have production, distribution, and consumption. So these are instructions for production. You have to do something. Everybody has to do something. So if we engage according to our nature, whether it's agriculture or carpentry or building, making bricks or healthcare or teaching, if everybody engages in their duty, this is production. It provides for the necessities of everyone. The second point Krishna makes is that the results of our activities do not belong to us. You're not entitled to the fruits of action. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. The wise engage in devotional service free themselves from the cycle of birth and death by renouncing the fruits of action in the material world. Abandon all attachment to the results of your activities and giving up all sense of proprietorship over possessions. So that's the second fundamental point, is in terms of ownership. The results of our activities do not belong to us. Now this is a very, very significant point in economic affairs. Ownership. Who can own something? When I started to study, investigate economics in terms of Bhagavad Gita, I was looking around in all economics books for a definition of ownership. I couldn't find any. It doesn't exist in the economic books. I finally wound up, I had to go to the law library to find where the idea of ownership is established in our society. Now, this comes to us from Roman civilization. The Romans, they held that everything must have an owner, but they didn't consider the ownership of God. Everything must have a human owner, and not just a human owner, but a select human owner. That means a Roman citizen. So slaves couldn't own things, but Roman citizens, they could not only own things, but they could own unlimited amounts of things. These ideas were established in Roman law, which is considered the Roman culture's greatest contribution to Western society. So this idea of ownership, unlimited private ownership, has come to us, to the West, from the Romans, and very importantly, these ideas have been transferred all around the whole planet under global economy. If you want to do trade in the world, you have to do things legally, and legally means you transfer possession, transfer of ownership from one party to another one. So this global economy has actually destroyed all other conceptions of ownership around the world. Actually, formerly there were many different kinds of conceptions of ownership. Most cultures, in fact, most of the indigenous cultures of the world didn't have a conception of private ownership. They had a conception of group ownership. The Slavic cultures of Europe, for example, they had the idea was that everything belonged to the clan, a large group of people, and it didn't matter what it was. It could be land, could be a house, could be even furniture. Whatever you might possess actually belonged to the group, and periodically those resources would be redistributed to different members of the group as the demographics or as changes occurred in the members. So children grow up, parents no longer need a big house. Okay, the big house goes to somebody else with a growing family. The two parents, now they go to a smaller house. Or somebody dies, his possessions are taken back into the group and again distributed according to everyone, according to their need. There's examples from all over the world like this, of the conception of group ownership. This is also very significant in modern culture. When we have group ownership, nobody becomes impoverished. Nobody is left out. Everybody is entitled to whatever they need to be able to survive. So the previous cultures, which I might add were much more Sattvic cultures than what we have today, these cultures, they created a method, by using this method of group ownership, they enabled everyone to feel secure. Of course, we can compare that to the modern day. 10 years ago at least, I remember reading Robert McNamara, who was the head of the World Bank at that time, said that there were more than 1 billion people in the world who did not know where their next meal were going to come from. They were so poverty-stricken, they had no idea how they're going to eat in the next day. 1 billion people out of, maybe at that time there was 5, maybe a little more than 5 billion, so 20% of the people in the world. This is not the idea of Vedic culture. Still, it's one of the ideas of this idea of private, unlimited private ownership. We bring this into, it's come into our society along with us in a very unconscious way. I'll give you just a simple example of the Alachua community. In Alachua, Florida, our biggest community of devotees in America. In that community, there's more than 5 millionaires. And some of those people have, at least 2 of those people that I know of, have substantial millions. At the same time, 90% of the children going to the day school were qualified for government support because of their poverty. So this is called disparity. Somebody has a lot, other people don't have very much. This is parity means equal. So this disparity, this great disparity, is one of the causes of social disruption and social disturbances in society. But nonetheless, even though our philosophy says Krishna is the owner of everything, we have not yet found a way to live that philosophy. So we all are operating still under this idea of I and mine. Okay. The third point then, is that true? Yeah. The third point is, what do we do? Okay, we're working hard. We can't keep the fruits of action. What do we do with them? They're meant to be offered to the Lord in sacrifice and then distributed to others. And so the fruits of action are meant to be given to others. Krishna says, one who is beyond duality and doubt is always busy working for the welfare of all sentient beings. Does Krishna say, one who's in duality and one who's beyond duality and doubt, he engages in business and he sells the fruits of his activity to others? No. He doesn't say that. He says one works for the welfare of others. He doesn't say that you sell to others. Maharaj was also making this point earlier that food and education were not sold in Vedic culture. There was not even any concept of selling these kinds of things. Again, this added to the great social security of all the members of the society. Then 4, as I mentioned, instead of we work, and the results of that activity we offer to the Lord in sacrifice. So all of our activities should be done in the spirit of devotional service. So we do our activity, we take the result, whatever it might be. Prabhupada said one time, even if you want to have factories, okay, you make an arrangement in the factory that everything that comes off the assembly line, there should be the deities there, and everything should be offered to the deities. Right? So whatever it is, if you're a carpenter and you make a table, if you're a house builder, you build houses, you weave cloth, whatever you do, you take it, you offer it to Krishna. You do your activity in that consciousness that I'm doing this to please the Supreme Lord. And by that way, in that way, a man can become perfect simply by his own work. And then the fifth point is one should act only for the bare necessities of life. This means, if we do that, this means that there will always be plenty. This is an economy of plenty, right, as opposed to the dominant culture that has an economy of scarcity. So these are all these 5 points. They're supported by those verses that I just read to you, and they explain an entire economy. Now, how would this economy function? Let me give you the key word here. It's a gifting economy. Okay? It's based on everybody giving what they do. And this requires an entire shift of consciousness where instead of thinking, what am I going to get? How am I going to get? How much am I going to get? One then starts to think about, what am I going to give? What gift do I have? What ability, what talent do I have to give to others? Now this shift changes so many things. First of all, we're not limited to one so-called occupation that we do the majority of time. Everyone has many skills. And generally, in this world, people have one skill that they use to make money, and then there are other skills they engage in as what they call hobbies, things that they do for their own pleasure. Under this scheme, you do what you like to do, which is the description of varna, as we were saying yesterday. What's your varna? Whatever you like to do. You do that. You don't have to do something that you don't like to do. Now, at this point in time in America, actually the number is increasing. 10 years ago, the statistic was 80% of people did not like the work that they were doing. More recently, I read a statistic that went up to 85%. Why do they do that? I need the money. People are simply focused on how to get the money in order to, what? Have sense gratification. This is their dharma, artha, and kama, right? Their dharma is work hard like an ass as much as you can, and it doesn't matter how you get the money. Actually, the dharma is actually our dharma, right? If you can get more money by lying, cheating, scamming, stealing, nobody's going to question. Whoever has money gets respect. So, our dharma, artha, economic development in this way. Then kama, sense gratification, and moksha. Who cares? Nobody's even thinking about that. So this gifting economy changes the whole way of living in this world, the whole way of thinking, and it allows us to engage in everything in Krishna consciousness. Let me do what I'm doing for the pleasure of Krishna. So our work then would actually give us a double reward. Not only do I get to do the things that I like to do, but because in just that in itself, because I like to do it, it's rewarding. But also, I get to do that thinking, let me do this nicely for the pleasure of Krishna. And in that way, it actually becomes devotional service, which purifies us and allows us to actually experience the result of the rest of our sadhana. It doesn't detract from our sadhana as other work might. I have 3 children. I was grahasta. And so I had many working experiences in this life. I didn't, when I became I became a devotee before I actually started working. And so for about 4 or 5 years I was just living in Prabhupada's temples and I was doing devotional service. I raised my consciousness up very nice, very high. But then I needed money. My children, my first child was born, I had to get a job. And then I had to go out and, do my duty. Doing that duty meant that I had to associate with people that otherwise I would not have associated with. It meant that I had to attend company functions where they would have like a company dinner or banquet, right? And you all know what they would serve at those things and what they were doing, breaking 2 of the regular principles at least. But socially I was obligated to be there, otherwise I really couldn't keep my position in the company. The result of my experience was that my consciousness that I had lifted up, and I was still, of course, even though I was doing this work, I was still chanting my rounds and trying to, reading the Bhagavatam and so on. But the result of my work activity was that my consciousness came down, down, down. Why? Because I was involved in this Uga Karma activity, associating with non-devotees. And we become like the people that we're with, very unconsciously. I'll give you an example. One job I had in the middle 80s was I was a stockbroker. And actually that was the time when this idea of spiritual economics came around. But when I was a stockbroker, I was working in San Francisco, and in San Francisco there's many wealthy people who live north of San Francisco in a very wealthy community called Marin County. And everybody there, they drive, they don't drive American cars, they drive European sports cars. Right? And so when I arrived there to San Francisco, I was driving my American car. But after a few years of associating with these people, what was I driving? I had my own BMW. I was driving my own European car. And I could see that very unconsciously I was picking up the values of these people that I was working with. Just by, not that I actually socialized with them or anything, but just being in that environment. Because when we're social animals, and we get in such any environment, we need to be like the people that we're with. Otherwise we can't stay there. So when I saw that was going on, I realized, this can't continue. I have to change this. So I gave up that job and I went back and lived in the temple again and repaired my consciousness. Anyway, so the point is that Krishna's instructions, he tells us to do a gifting economy. Now, is such a thing possible? Well, there have been gifting economies in the past. There's one group of natives in Vancouver Island. Do you know the name of these people? Coquitl or something like that? Kwakiuto. Very difficult to pronounce. They had this tradition. Actually, their economy was based on what they called the potlatch. And this potlatch was a gift-giving ceremony. And I don't know how many times, maybe they had this 2 or 3 times or 4 times a year. But in the intervening periods, everyone would work very hard to produce as much as possible so that they could give it away. And so they would all come together, a big community gathering, and they would have a competition to see who could give away the most things. And whoever could give away the most, they became the most respected and honored person in the whole group. And everyone, gave them great respect and honor and so on. This is the way their culture functioned. It was completely gift economy, completely. There was no consciousness of taking, getting, and things for myself. And actually it was so interesting because if after everyone had as much as they wanted, if there was something left over, what they would do is destroy it, so that it didn't become some incentive for greediness. They would destroy what was ever left over, and then again they would start to build up things to give away for the next potlatch. That's one example. There's actually many other examples. Nomadic cultures also were, in a sense, gifting. Had gifting economies. They would just go and they would use whatever was available in the land. One anthropologist called the Kalahari Bushmen of Africa, who was a nomadic tribes, he called them the original, what's the word for it? When you have everything that you need? Sorry, I'm not taking enough ginkgo biloba. It begins with an A. Yes, thank you. The original affluent society. Because they had everything that they needed. There's two ways to do that. One is to have a lot of money and a lot of everything, and the other one is to have very simple needs. And the Bushmen, they had very, very simple needs. And so they had everything that they needed. One sociologist went and was visiting with them, and when they were gathering some food stuff, he suggested to them, well, why don't you put something away, preserve it, for later. And they all looked at him like, are you crazy? Where are you coming from? Huh? What's the need for that? Because there's no scarcity. Huh? They don't have any concept of scarcity. They go someplace else, there's plenty available there, and then they go someplace else, like that. So these things have functioned in the past. A very significant element, however, is sattva-guna. This gifting economy can only work in a climate of sattva-guna, which is, interestingly, just what our sadhana actually does for us, right? Following our principles of spiritual life raises us to sattva-guna. So it's possible to do this. This is possible. All we have to do is figure out how to do it. And I have a suggestion for that. How much more time do we have?
Well, strictly speaking, your time just ran out.
Oh, okay. Just real quick. We already do this. We already do this. Anybody recognize where we do this?
Self-sufficient farm.
No. Well, maybe. But many places all around the world. All of Prabhupada's temples. Every one of Prabhupada's temples, this is how we live. Right? But we do that only in this one building, right? And then as soon as we go outside the building, we very unconsciously shift cultures and go back to the ways of the dominant culture. What we need to do is expand the size of the temple to the size of a village. Krishna is the owner of everything. Everything's done on his account as devotional service. Nothing belongs to us. We live a simple life. The fruits of what we do are meant for others. We already do this as devotees. But somehow or other, it only works for single young adults. Why? If you want to get married, if you're an old person, if you're somebody with children already, if you're a child yourself, you don't get to participate. Why? Because we only do it in one building. So what we have to do is expand the concept of a temple to the size of a village. Just continue doing what we're doing, but now we have many more activities to do, such as agriculture, carpentry, and making bricks, making houses. Enough engagement for every man, not just book distribution, deity worship, cleaning, and cooking, which is generally all we have in our temples. Preaching. But there's many, many more activities, enough for everybody. So, this is the idea of spiritual economics. Tomorrow I'm going to connect this with Varnashram Dharma and Davidhanashram. So I'll stop there and perhaps you have some questions.
Actually, I agree with everything you're saying. It's very ideal, and it'd be nice to be there. I remember, like, in the 70s and 80s, especially living like this in the temples. In Vancouver, where I'm from, and householders were basically being supplied their needs and such. But what seemed to happen, like for the brahmacharis, for example, like the van belonged to Krishna. So, but because of immaturity, there's neglect in putting oil in the van, sometimes the engine would blow, whatever. And for householders, sometimes their children perhaps maybe weren't getting enough for their needs. We had to go to the secretary to get them bank or money. And I guess so there's different problems there because of our immaturity. So, do you think this can be practically implemented at this time with the maturity of devotees, or what do you think?
All we have to do is make an arrangement. It's not an impossible thing to do. But a very key element is that the agriculture, let's say one of the difficulties is we're in an urban environment instead of in a village. This system works best when it's agricultural-based economy. What's economy mean? The word economics itself comes from the Greek word economos, which means household. Basically, that means food, shelter, and clothing. Okay? Which is what the economic problem is. But there isn't really anything more than that. Anything more than that is actually superfluous to the economy. It's something else. Sense gratification. Right? So, in a village environment, one can produce from the earth all these necessities, and then you don't have to go begging for money. In the city, it's very difficult to do this. Because in the city you live on money. So Krishna's arrangement is everything that we need is provided for by his agency through Mother Earth. He doesn't charge, right? Bhumi is not asking, you put some seeds. First, 100 rupees, or no rice. Mother cow, she doesn't say, you're going to pay me? No. Freely. They're out of love. They're giving. This is already Krishna's nature. Krishna's economy is already going on. Every species is giving what they have, which is generally their bodies, in the service of others. So it's already going on. We just have to enter into that natural economy. Okay? All right?
Okay, thank you for your presentation. There is, I'm maybe what Prabhu here previously said also is a little bit, in one sense, because we said this group ownership, okay? So I'm on a farm community, and we have established a kind of village, but it's difficult with the group owning, because it's nice to use a tractor, but who is going to repair it? We've said, a little bit like the Sankirtan band and this kind of things. So I think, I mean, Krishna said everything is under control of the Supreme Lord. And one has a right to take what you need, but not more, because of your thief. And that way you can live forever, not forever, but for 100 years. But my struggle is with, thought is this, because it's expanding the temple. The temple, in one sense, exists in kind of a socialistic setting, you could say. And then if you expand it into the village, on one hand having the gifting economy, at the same time having the impetus for someone to take care of something, so to say. And well, of course, you said something, that's just, and then there's the expression, proprietorships to sand into gold. And then, that's like my dilemma. How to make that work so that devotees feel inspired, at the same time it's a good thing economy, without being impaired by some socialistic or bureaucratic system.
Okay. You brought up several points, so I'll try to remember all of them. If I forget, please remind me, okay? Proprietorship transcends the gold. Actually, this aphorism is a bit misstated. People do not actually need to have proprietorship. What they want to have is control. In other words, if I'm doing some activity, I want to be able to control the result. So, because let's say I'm doing agriculture, right? I want to produce something. That's why I do that activity. I want to grow food. Now, if somebody else is going to come along and tell me how to do it this way, do it that way, other than the way that I want to do it, I lose my enthusiasm because I don't have control over what I'm doing. Maybe the suggestions are good, maybe they're not. But what people want is control, which is connected to your other point about who's going to maintain the tractor. Everything must have an owner. This idea of the Romans is not bad. Krishna is the owner, but then there's somebody who has to have responsibility. This falls under the responsibilities of the Varnas, the Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Everything in the society should be under the direct control of somebody who maintains that thing by his own consciousness. Everything is maintained by consciousness, and if nobody puts their consciousness there because Krishna is the owner, right, then it's going to fall apart. So Krishna can be the owner, but I might have the responsibility to maintain that machine, put the oil in it, and so on like that. So there's a third point. Do you remember?
No.
So it's not proprietorship per se; it's control. I want to be able to produce. I want to be able to give according to my ability. So if I'm doing art, for example, if I'm doing music, if I'm doing whatever I'm doing, I don't need somebody to come and manage me and tell me, do it like this. Let me give my gift from my own heart. Then I'll be happy and satisfied, and I'll give to the best of my ability. So this is the kind of consciousness that needs to be encouraged. Well, again, this is a blend of the two cultures. In the dominant culture, people have the idea of proprietorship. I own this, and I'm going to get the results. Right? I own a company, and all these people are working for me to make me rich. I don't have any responsibility to them. They're actually creating the wealth of the company, but I'm the owner, so I'm going to take everything. So we take this idea of proprietorship, and we think that by the hard work of others, I'm going to become rich, or I'll be maintained by others. We have an unfortunate, we have an example of this here in Mayapur, in what they call, New Manhattan? Who owns those places?
That's a loose term. It's not really a public term.
I know. Okay.
Some various individual devotees that live here.
So they're making, you've seen them, 7-story buildings over there. And what are they going to do? Rent them?
Sell the flats.
Sell the flats. And for profit or for not profit?
For profit.
For profit. So this is not the this is the consciousness of the dominant culture. That's the way the world works, and we haven't separated that. We haven't understood the difference between that and the Christian culture. We haven't seen how this is opposite. Is that how that's?
I guess in a sense it's opposite.
Opposite, yeah. Opposed to our Siddhanta. Anyway, does that answer your question, Mara? So,
Something.
you want to ask again?
Not now. Let the seminar go on.
Okay. All right. Who else?
Prabhuji, yes, we are at this moment living in city life, dominated culture life. How can we practically shift to this Vrindavan village or make Vrindavan village practically? What is the practical shape and detail for a particular family member?
Good question. I always am asked this question. Nice idea, but how are you going to do that? Right? Or they say, this is only for pure devotees. Where are you going to find all those pure devotees? And I say, well, they're already pure devotees, they're already doing this in Prabhupada's temple, so why can't they just continue to do that in a different setting? How are we going to do that? Prabhupada gave the answer to that question in this Gita Nagari paper. It was mentioned yesterday, the day before, Prabhupada prescribed a means of financing Gita Nagari, that by the Shrutis and Srimatis, the Shrutis, those who know what to live, how to live, that they should direct the activities of Gita Nagari, and the Srimatis, those who Krishna has blessed to hold his wealth, should give contribution for the maintenance of Gita Nagari. We have to do that for some time because we have to buy our way out of this culture. You have to buy the land. We're not going to hear in their Varnashram project, they're not going to make glass and hinges for doors and screws and nails and things like that. We have to buy those things. So for whatever we have to buy, we're going to need money, and that money has to come from people who have money. It should not. We should not do the idea of making money to do that. No. The people who already have money, they should give. Because when we get into this consciousness of making money, the whole paradigm shifts again to it puts money higher than everything else. So the whole shift in priorities, values changes. So it's a cooperative effort by everyone who realizes the need to establish the Daiviganashram culture. And how is that going to be accomplished? The way Mayapur is already built, the way all of our temples are maintained, by the cooperative efforts of many, many devotees, each giving what they have according to their talents and ability. Same way. Donation, yeah.
In the society.
Yeah.
In the cities, various talents, people are working in different companies, offices, jobs or business are there. Is it any practical method, like their talents can be utilized for the Krishna consciousness of Varnashram to develop from the cities? Okay, Mayapur is okay, Vrindavan is okay, but how can it be possible in cities?
How to do this in the cities?
Yes, to utilize the talents what they are spending their precious human lifetime for in different corporates, but which is not related to the actual purpose of life.
Yeah, okay. Many things, as I mentioned earlier, most people have many different skills that they can use or contribute with. Somebody may have a job in the city, but he knows computers and how to work with computers, and so he can do desktop publishing or, graphic art on computers or something like that, internet preaching, so many things like that. Some things I think are very difficult to dovetail. I was trained as an engineer, and my engineering experience was that it's all ugra karma, and it doesn't contribute really to what I wanted to contribute to the world, so I stopped doing engineering. I didn't see a place for that. Although some of that can be used. For example, if we want to have electricity, so we can take, for example, a wind generator, a windmill. Take that and use your engineering skill to make a mechanism so ox can go around in a circle and gear it up so it runs by ox power instead of wind power. This gives an ox a job, gives him some purpose, some activity, and allows a person to use that kind of skill in this activity. So it generates electricity for free, no cost. Anyway, we just have to apply our intelligence to see. The general idea, we're not just going to, I don't want to give the impression that we're just all the devotees should just move out of the city en masse and just go to the village. That's crazy. That won't work. Everybody, it's crazy. It can't happen. It cannot be successful. You can only start in a small way, a small project, build it, develop it successfully, and then grow it. Just like everything else in Krishna's economy. It starts very small and gradually grows and develops. So I'm convinced this must go on the same way. A handful of individuals who have this understanding, have this desire, who want to demonstrate the principles of Krishna consciousness in action, so they cooperate together, form a small community, and then naturally grow it. Okay?
Just a comment connected to the question that you had asked. What to do in cities if we have some youths around who are interested in varnashram or related, and what do we do? How do we contribute? A similar question came to a few youths who are in of the state in Andhra Pradesh, one of the place. Then we started something called as Varnashram Research Team.
Varnashram Research Team.
Varnashram Research Team. So a lot of research activities were started, and it's now 2 years down the line. The team is still going fully energetic, and they have achieved a lot in terms of doing a lot of research connected to Varnashram, and as a result of which documentary movies have been produced and more research have been taken up. With this experience, we are opening other research teams in other states like in Karnataka, and many more are coming up. Many more youths are interested in such teams. As Dhanesvara Prabhu was telling, that temple services stops at very few related services like deity worship or cooking or etc. So these Varnashram research teams extend these activities to the city students, city youth, working youth, how they can engage themselves and contribute in this Varnashram mission. So maybe later we can discuss about Varnashram research team.
Time?
We can go until 1 o'clock.
Okay.
It's up now.
Just spend another 10 minutes here. There is no question.
I just came across Prabhupada books, lectures probably before you, where Prabhupada talks about Kshatriyas, the mentality of Kshatriyas. Unless they have something as their ownership or maybe control, they are not so inspired to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So, how would you relate it with proprietorship and control?
There's a need for a person what we call a Kshatriya. Kshatriya by his nature, he wants to, he's like a father, like a big father. He can take care of a lot of people. He has a lot of ability to deal with the material energy. And he wants to exercise that. Like everybody wants to use their talent, right? The problem is, in modern society, where are these men going to do that? Only in business, really. And so, that's where all these people go. They go because there they can use their ability to, do as much as they can. So we need to actually, I've been looking for Kshatriyas actually for some years. They're a little difficult to find in our society. We don't give a place for them, typically. And some of the ones that I've met, they become discouraged and they want to go away. I'll speak more about this point tomorrow, but basically the varnas, if we consider economic activity in relationship to varnas, it's according to ability. So Shudras, they don't have much ability. They need to be told what to do, but they're willing to do it. Okay, that's good. It's like a worker. Then the next you have Vaishyas, which is like a manager or maybe a small business owner. He knows what to do. He knows the result that he wants to get. He knows how to engage people. He knows the resources that he needs. So he has more ability. And then there's other who have more ability yet. They can create maybe, a worldwide organization or something like that. They've got a lot of ability. They know they like to command a lot of resources. So, according to a man's ability, he should be given resources. Then the Kshatriya's job is to look and see, can he use those resources appropriately or not? If not, he reduces it to the man's actual ability, or he increases it to the man's ability. Now in terms of control, the Kshatriya, he's the representative of the Supreme Lord. He has control over this piece of land, some piece of land. The way I understand this, it's an idea, that the Kshatriya, he should own the land. He should own all the houses there. He should own the whole thing. It's his, what we call a kingdom. And when you live there at his grace. If he's properly directed by the Brahmanas in his saintly Richarshi, then his purpose in having you live there is to maintain you and to see that to help you grow spiritually. Yeah, king. Right.
Sometimes also mentioned.
Yeah, Kshatriya means king, basically. Anyway, did I answer your question? That's the way I see it. Now, how to do that in the context of the modern culture is difficult. Because we have also some unfortunate experiences. We've had some men who had ability in the past. They've gathered the resources, they create a big community, and then they go to a different sampradaya, something like that. So there's challenges to that we have to just, with a cool head, think about and address. Okay? I just want to make a point here on the sheets that are going to be passed out. There's one where I compare the different attributes of spiritual economics and material economics. I'm not going to be able to discuss that. But if you look at there's 2 pages. The first page I give the slokas and the 5 points, these 5 points. And if you think about those, you can relate them to what's on the second page in terms of the different characteristics and attributes of spiritual and material economics. Second thing I want to point out here, I've got a website it's under construction. There's a typo on the first page, but it's correct on the second page. It's spiritual-econ, ECON.info. Not eco, econ. Or? Anything else?
We can break it out here if no one has anything. I was going to say if no one has anything, then we can just end with that.
Since sometimes we're in a position where devotees are not millionaires, what if there are people that are not devotees but are willing to share part of their land? Would you suggest that would be what kind of relationship would you have to make with people that are not devotees?
Share means leasing? They lease the land, or they just give use of it for some time, or what?
Like my father has a farm, and he said that if it's a plan, if it's a certain amount of people, it would just have to be wondering about what kind of agreement, like mature agreement.
Well, you'd have to, it's something that you have to work out. What what we're doing is building a community, and you don't want to put, thousands of man hours of effort into something, and then the owner says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I changed my mind. We're not going to do this anymore. Goodbye." You don't want to have that kind of situation. So you have to have reasonable security that somehow or other you're going to be able to continue there. So I don't know. I'd say be very careful with that. The other thing is, in terms of this, I also think it's very important for projects, our rural projects, that we should not start until the land is completely paid for. Because what we want to do is minimize the need for dollars. Dollars means you have to go into that culture to get them. Somehow or other, they have to come from the dominant culture. And that can become very difficult. Even if you have donors who would say, yes, we'll cover that, the land, you can't afford to lose your land. You have to make sure that you have that. So I would suggest the land should be paid for completely before it even begins. Okay, it's almost 1 o'clock, so unless there's any other question. Thank you very much. Tomorrow I'm going to relate this to Varnashram, and we'll talk more about the economics of Dhanesvara Dharma. Okay, thank you very much.
So we'll meet back here at 3:45 this afternoon. And what is the topic for this afternoon? Purushottam Maharaj from Brazil is going to be making a presentation on the work he's doing in his various preaching places. He has some farms and things in Brazil, so we'll hear from him. So we could all assemble back here at 3:45 sharp. Thank you very much.
This thing is going crazy.
Morris just wants to get out.
What's that? I don't know. They have the handouts someplace. They didn't give you Maharaj already? Where's the handout? Prabhu, you have? You have this handout to give to everyone?